I had somebody who was an artist that I interviewed who had experiences that were related to a reptilian hosting situation with her current husband,
Right.
who was and it had to do with interface technology that I thought was interesting, that had to do with like strip clubs and like these prostitutes and then UFOs and architecture. And it was interesting because she was a clairvoyant, so she could perceive this interface technology that appeared to be connected to like reptilian ships that would be like over, strip clubs and certain architectures that were actually interfacing and affecting people in those
And he was
environments.
getting activated from being in them
Oh
somehow.
yeah, he
Right.
got completely posted or partially possessed, and then,
Ooh.
I don't know if you could call it a full possession, but she described what she saw in different ways, and then she was able to draw some images for me, and it was actually a two-part interview that it was called UFOs and strip clubs, like
And
we'll
it's
have it.
somewhere on the internet.
Oh, it's on my website actually. So if I could share screen, I don't know if it will pop up. This is just one image. Can you see that?
Yes.
And this is like a larger image. And then there's several of,
A
it's a
little bit
part
like
one. And
string theory or something.
so basically this area here was basically a strip club kind of scene where her husband would like frequent these strip clubs. I think it was in New Orleans actually, but he would, go and then have lap dances and, have sex with these prostitutes that were hooked up to the reptilians and the technology that seemed to be over them like in an interdimensional way. And
Mm.
then it would allow like this, there would be a reptilian who was overviewing it and connecting with it with this interface technology, and then it would more easily host him and transfer like a reptilian being into the husband. And then she had seen things through her third eye in these meditation processes where she would see weird things that would appear that this is part of, let's see if I can go back to the other. I mean, there was so much in this, and there was two parts to this, but the whole idea is that there are interdimensional technologies. Let me see. Oh, I don't know. Let me see if this one pops up anything. This one was a good one. It was actually another French clairvoyant. I hope it's still available. It may or may not be. I had to pull it up on the internet. It didn't show up. Shit. Oh well. Sorry. Yeah, that's what happens when they're old
Yeah,
images
I
and they
guess they
won't
get
show up.
taken down after a while, right?
Yes.
We have to
Yeah,
learn
and
to
I guess
download everything that we want to keep. But according to Miles Johnson, he says we
yeah,
better do that and we better start making like VHS tapes and
yes.
things we want to keep because they're going to be gone.
This is the original article called Reptilian Hosting and Strip Clubs. And it was a woman who had a husband who would frequent these clubs, and he had, personality, like a narcissistic personality anyway, but then he became more and more unusual behaviors that indicated there was possession going on based on her perception. So one of them, I don't know if you could see it very big, she at first saw that there was this image clairvoyantly that would pop up in her vision of like this iguana, almost like an
Ah.
iguana like hanging out on her shoulder, and then behind it was like a white box, like a metal box. And then she observed later that it was more like a neon, what we would call a calling card holographic image that announced that this person is hosted with a reptilian, but the real image would show up as the classic image that overshadows a large one, and it would
Right.
overshadow the image like when they were having sex. And then she saw this thing and then felt it as he was having sex with her, and it was like he couldn't stay in the body for more than a certain period of time, and then would leave like after sex. But she noticed that there were changes in her husband as he became more hosted. You know, his like pheromone smell changed, and then she started doing more meditations and, you know, just in her own healing process to find out all these connections with architecture. And there was also
Mm,
interdimensional, you know how people see orbs of light and stuff in their bedrooms that pop up? She would see, I'm just going to stop screen sharing. It's too hard for me to do this, actually.
okay, no
Um,
problem.
I can't concentrate here.
Just talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, what I believe was interdimensional technologies where she would have like an orb of light that had all these different digital kind of shiny things, and then it would distort time and space in her bedroom, and then certain orbs of light that would, as if they were surveillance and monitoring and influencing technology that can be seen with the third eye. And some people could see them, they think it's visually there, but oftentimes you just see it in your third eye. But it's a type of drone or surveillance or influencing technology that, you know, humans could be using this too. In fact, the military have been
Right.
reported these technologies where they would send out these like blue balls of light, and then they'd get these telepathic messages when the blue balls of light would appear in the room, and it was really the military. So I think that we have access to all kinds of technology as well as aliens, or maybe that's where it came from, or that's what they're saying. But there are different kinds of technologies that people see. So it's not just an alien popping in their room or whatever. Then they get the
That's
orbs
right.
light, weird little things that start showing up, you know, and then it might like make them have images in their mind, you know, like being in two places at once, where they'd be in their body, and then they would also be as if they're in another place in another body, like split consciousness and being in two places at once. Like sometimes the MyLabs and the abductees would have that, where they're literally in two places at once because their consciousness is split and they're literally functioning on another level of reality, like in a lab or in a ship while they're still in their body.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you've heard of that's kind of weird, but yeah.
Well, I was hoping to open the floor to everybody because I'm sure that people have questions for you. I mean, lots of people came, so you have your opportunity to talk to Evie today. So come on out to play.
Oh, well, I have a question. Oh, okay. Just go ahead. Yeah, because otherwise I would ask you something.
Oh, no, you can go ahead, Edie. That's fine.
Well, actually, it has to do with Miles Johnson had interviewed a man in 2011 named Chris Thomas, who was a energy healer, I think from Scotland, but I'm not sure what country. But he had quite an interesting and a different perspective of the different ETs and aliens based on how he perceived some higher level, actually a more malevolent one that would take many forms, and he called them the Velon, and that they were associated with the Anunnaki, and that they may take different forms and have infected different religious and spiritual narratives in order to get us to go away from the earth with them, or allow them into our world reality by opening up portals and, you know, kind of going along with the narrative that they keep pushing. A lot of times it's through channeled messages, but what's interesting is there's a certain form of entity that I thought, well, maybe that's what he thought the Velon were, based on what Dr. Corrado Malanga identified in many of his abductee regressions, where there was like a hierarchy of beings, different ones that would appear, not only what he called corporeal, but incorporeal forms. So they could be, let's say, of an astral form, but they may take different images even in the astral, right? So one of the main higher up ones, he called it the Orus Ra entity. And so this one was, it kind of had like a bird-like beak and looked like an Orus Ra hawk-headed kind of being, but it had these weird little hooky things on the shoulder, and almost like a cloak-like thing, and a funny little thing on its chin. And they were like a higher level hierarchy of being that would be like the higher level controllers that I think may be related to what Chris Thomas mentioned in his identification, or how he talked about the VLONs, which you don't hear about much at all in the UFO literature at all, like in the alien literature. And he has actually passed on, he passed away, but there's a really good interview that Miles did with him in 2011 that I feel is a very good interview, and that it talks about, and this is one of the reasons why I guess I take a more cautious approach to channeled entity messages that claim to be a certain ET, although I'm aware of benevolent beings that I have been in contact with myself. So I'm not completely, all one belief.
Right.
But what I had found is that there are some that may present themselves as benevolent ETs with a certain narrative about ascension, and that it's part of a con job. And based on what people have told me later, I learned later that this was part of like a larger Illuminati, like super high level bloodline thing where they remembered, well, let's just say people that I know who remembered Saint Germain, like the real one who was associated with the Golden Dawn and who knew him in another life. And he is what I call the white checkerboard square Luciferian player. Okay.
Right.
So many people were like, well, just call upon Saint Germain and the ascended masters and this being and that being, and like, you better
Right.
be careful here, because this is how they get you opened up to their reality. And then it seems to me that, even in some of these cases where it's kind of like we're doing exorcisms, to make long story short, that when you challenge some of these high level beings that are claiming to be ascended masters, and when someone, let's say, they start to challenge what their spirit guides are telling them, and then if they are malevolent, for example, then that's when they really throw them the whole interference factor and will do punishing behaviors, and then their true nature will be revealed as you basically challenge them, and sometimes in the name and authority of Jesus Christ, that then they start rearing their ugly heads, and then you start seeing them like for who they really are, because they may take different images in different forms. So this is why, always, do the discernment thing. And that was another thing I wanted to bring up, because a friend actually lent me a book called Divine Revelation, and I think it's a 1996 book by Susan Shumsky. But this book is all about how to heal and discern, like when you're getting visions or messages or prophetic things or channeled entity, this or that, and how you would have a better ability to discern the spirits. Because like in the Bible, they say, well, ask the spirit, did Jesus Christ come in the flesh? And then always be discerning. But sometimes it's a limited, like, well, we need more information. Like, how are we really going to find out all the different nuances of how we can tell, like, well, if they're really, pulling the wool over my eyes, how can I tell by the way it feels and by what are the fruits of the spirit? So I've seen this happen in the old days before they kind of caught on to a lot of the con jobs that they were doing, where somebody had gone through, an abduction history that was related to MK Ultra, and then they were channeling these light beings and acting like a light worker, but then they had all this hidden trauma. And then when they maybe did some of their healing work, they found out that it was, a lot of these malign abduction and MK Ultra stuff. And then they would change the name and write another book, and then to keep channeling this and that and the other, and keep doing the same thing under a different name or under a different, being. But it was the same kind of program repackaged, but it's the same theme playing out. So we just need to watch out for that, so that we can be more discerning when something comes true, because you don't want to be hopping on a ship to the great cattle drive in the sky, like Dr. Carla Turner warned, which people really got pissed off at her about that, because people are wanting to believe in this pre-tribulation rapture, when the beings come and take us, when we go through the earth changes and they start rescuing us. And there's some of that going on even in the Dark Side of Cupid. There's a case study that Barbara Bartholic had given me years ago and I think it was called the Mariah and the Spirit Guide case history, where she was told by these spirit ET guide beings that, you know, they would, these future things would happen. She would be this ambassador for this race of beings. She would have this special position. They did all these flatteries. They told her all these things would happen in the future. And then it didn't happen. And then, you know, a near demonic possession happened. And then she got involved in love bite and all this other stuff that just kind of unraveled into all this like crap that really wasn't true. But it was a line they were feeding her about future events that just didn't pan out. So we always have to just be discerning and ask those questions.
One thing that that we didn't get into, and I thought that it was really important, so I'm just gonna throw it out there for a minute, is that when these love bite relationships are happening, the emotional trauma, chaos, turbulation between the two people is so intense that they'll quit jobs, they'll quit school, they'll stop going places, you know, they'll stop doing their work. And a lot of times they take people away from their real spiritual work.
Yes.
So that was an aspect that I wanted you to talk about, because you know way more about this than I do. But I forgot to ask you that question. And that would be a good one, because I think that's one way that people can tell if they have a love bite.
Oh, yes. Well, sometimes there's a setup so that, let's say someone is working on, that would be like a neutralization tactic with a whistleblower, for example, or that even happened to me when I was going to go to see Barbara Bartholick years ago for a hypnotic regression about the love bite setup, because I couldn't remember it all. And I wanted to do a regression with her. And then I had set up the trip to fly out. And then I had an abduction before that, like a week before that or whatever, of it had to do with military. And there appeared to be maybe a reptilian presence or energy there, where they were interrogating me and threatening me not to go, or they would do some bad things. And I don't want to say what, but, and then I came back sick with like cut marks in my throat and just got really, really sick, and I just couldn't travel. So that kind of told me, well, why wouldn't they want me to know what that's about? Why would they not want me to know how that all happened? What do they want me to believe? You know? So there's people in the book, the Dark Side of Cupid book, who were involved with, let's say, there's a man who was dating a woman who was a high level channeler, who had a lot of like really good psychic abilities and channeled, I don't know, any number of these ascended masters, and that would try to, and he did have past life experiences with her, but they tried to lead him into the narrative and belief system that the entity she was channeling wanted him to believe, while they set him up in a love bite and basically milking his energy through this woman. And then when he challenged that, basically all hell broke loose, and he broke up with her, and it realized that it was the entities working through her that were misdirecting many, many people through her channeled, you know, messages and, you know, psychic readings and this and that. And so there are people who I think are misleading quite a few, and they may be actually really good psychics, by the way. So you only know later on down the road when these things play out, like the drama myth. Let's say he's dating a woman who's a channeler, and she's got these entities who are giving her messages. And then they say, oh, well, you met your twin flame and your soulmate, and you knew each other in another life. And maybe they actually really did know each other in another life. But then they do this thing where they amplify all this drama, and then they put them in these drama myth themes and roller coaster types of dramas in their life, so that it's as if they're playing the Osiris Isis drama or the Mary Magdalene Jesus, and then they're playing this really important role to fend off these evil forces, and they're important in this twin flame connection, and they're fighting off battles and hordes of evil, and they're really important because now they're taking on the archetype of Isis and Mary Magdalene and like all this stuff. okay, I don't know if you've heard this before, but I hear this over and over again with a lot of these twin flame things. And then it's like the same kind of theme where they over identify with an archetype or a past life figure. And they may even have memories that seem like they were Mary Magdalene in the past, or they were Isis, or they were a famous priestess or whatever. But then they over identify with a kind of self importance, which feeds into this drama that they're just drumming up to feed on and to give them a kind of like a misdirection from real spiritual growth. Is like really, sometimes it's the deep and icky work and it's really boring and it takes years and years and years and it doesn't make you feel important. Okay. So that's a sign you're kind of being misled here. You know what I mean? And it has a signature and a feel to it. So
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that.
I have a question or a couple things. Hi there, Evie. Can you hear me?
yes.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you?
Okay. Yeah.
Great. So thanks so much for presenting or for the interview. It's been fantastic, and your wealth of knowledge is it's invaluable. So thank you so much. So I'm an experiencer, and I've been presenting my story to Vancouver UFO. The next presentation I'm actually about to do is how they set me up with my wife. So it's very fortuitous because that will be in mid-September. I'll do that presentation, and so I have some insights that, or at least maybe mine is different. I just don't understand these differences between how I have a certain set of experiences and other people have different types of experiences, or they're similar. There's crossover, but there's variations of things. So the beings showed me very early on when I was a teenager, I was 16. By the way, all the memories were wiped or not available to me until midlife. So it all kind of like broke out. And I did a lie detector test to prove or to show that these memories are very real. And so when I was 16, basically they showed me that my higher self agreed to the relationship or agreed to it. Now at the time I didn't understand that stuff, and I was like, oh, okay. And the higher self that they showed me, only 40 years later, when I'm looking at everything, can I understand that
the beings, they showed me my higher self. Now it wasn't an illusion because they'll put me through a set of experiences in my teenage years and in my 20s in which I have to live kind of on the edge and on my intuition, and I'm traveling and I'd have no home and I'd go through all these crazy experiences, and they require intuition. And so I'm shown without a doubt that my intuition was involved with them. So my higher self, and you know, when you, by the time you're 40 and you meditate and you really treat spirituality as something real in your life, and before you know that you're being abducted by aliens, you confirm eventually that this is my intuition, this is my higher self, these are those feelings. When I rely on that, this is a truth, or this comes to fruition. And so I proved to myself that this was real, that some part of my life was kind of offered, if you will, to gray aliens. And when they hooked me up with my wife, I only now can understand this detail. I couldn't understand it at the time. My wife is my karma, and the people that she would introduce me to are all my karma. They're all people I now know I've had, you know, lifetimes of experiences with. And the beings set that up. They were like, it was like my higher self was like, here's a bunch of experiences. Of course, me, the present guy, had no idea, and semen extractions and biology was all involved. And yeah, it was at times it was gory, but nonetheless, there was this kind of offering up, and this me didn't quite understand it all at the time. And then they're like, okay, we're done with you. Now we're going to connect you. And then so there were several contact events that seemed to be kind of leading me towards my wife. And then when I meet her, you know, you've actually said some things. There were synchronicities that were involved, and at one point I felt an angel was telling me I was going to meet a woman, and so I had all these kind of things. And then we saw a UFO the night that we met.
Wow.
And so yeah, all these kind of things led up, and then the contact event stopped. And though I didn't know that I was having them, and by the time I was 40 and all came out, I saw how it all kind of led up to these events. So the interesting piece for me is that you know, when I don't understand this stuff, but the beings seem to. That's what this kind of leans towards. It seems like, you know, when we come into lives, we're born into a life. We make choices about what we're going to have happen in that life, or some choice. Obviously, I believe that there's an ability to change what happens in a life, but you know, when you're 18 and you get hit by that car and you're affected for the rest of your life, there's some things that sometimes seem to be meant to be, or that change directions. And it seems like being abducted by aliens was that level. It was some kind of life choice that was involved. And then they worked with that karma. They worked with my own individual karma, and yeah, sometimes maybe learned about humans or learned about me in the process. So yeah, they may have interjected challenge. I actually do believe that too. They did interject challenge in my life. So I was kerfuffled by what they by what they had done with me. But what's hard for me to rectify is that I know I agreed to it. And I know that when we come into lives, we agree to things. So it sits on that level of my mind for me, where I can feel that I know that they kind of they didn't screw up things, but they gave me challenges without a doubt.
Yeah.
And yet, all said and done, I can kind of now understand it on a kind of I don't feel duped, and I know my higher self was involved. And so there's this play of where I kind of I do believe it sits on the space of, you know, I did agree. My higher self before I was born did agree to that. And the same way I would have had I been in an accident that affected for me the rest of my life, or had a, you know, a horrible thing happen, or some kind of change of events that affects you the rest of your life, right? So yeah, it's not a question, I guess, but it's okay. Well, what do you think about that? Maybe that's it, is the question. What do you think about that perspective, or have you heard of that before? Have you ever heard of people coming to you with that kind of angle at it?
Definitely. I mean, it depends on your realization of how deep you realize multiple levels of consciousness and existence. So I know in my own life, I had many events that took place, which a lot of them were very hard and difficult. And then on the transcendental level, which is almost like a release of ego, almost like a near-death experience where you're kind of connected with like God. I don't know how else to explain it. And then there was a deep, deep knowing that a God that I'm connected with, that loves me very much, that I am one with. We co-created this life of experiences and everything that happened, including the aliens, in order to realize selfless love and to come closer to a realization of really a spiritual nature of what I am. And so it was like a point of realization. So it was as if my understanding is, okay, so people did what they did. Let's say, you know, the people in my family or the aliens, their nature is their nature, and they do what they do on their level. And then on our realization level, we understand that all this is co-created in some kind of, I don't want to say perfect way, on a whole higher level of co-creation, that when you come to that realization, then you know that, okay, so all this had happened for a reason, for me to realize this up to this certain point in life that drives me to do a deeper dive into finding the truth and discovering who I am on a spiritual level and telling the truth as I understood it. And then it revealed and deepened itself over time, so that it wasn't like I could blame the aliens or whatever. It's like I knew that we co-created all of this for a particular reason. But at the same time, there was, and this is where part of my healing thing had to come in, like in order, and my experience is different from yours, but in my family system of origin, which is just the human stuff, I had a narcissistic father and ended up in like codependent narcissistic relationships. So that steered me into having bad relationships and experiences later in life. So that in order for my recovery process to take place, I had to recognize the nature of people who exhibited, let's say, narcissistic personality disorder, or the nature of certain beings who will be what they are. It is their nature. Okay. So I had to understand their nature for who they are in order for me to regain a sense of self-trust and intuition about who I am and how I feel and what I want in order to move forward. So it didn't change their nature. I just changed myself and how I reacted to that, so that I no longer, it was like once a realization takes place, you jump into this other level, and then these other things, they no longer need to happen karmically because you realized what was necessary for your soul, wherever, why you're here. And then the next level of things will happen according to how that plays out. And sometimes we don't know until later, right? What an ultimate transcendental truth of who you are, why you're here, and why you're having these experiences. So it's always for you to discover what that is. And so I can't tell you what's right or wrong, and they are what they are. And what's important is you realize deeper truths of yourself and your experiences, and even these beings, how that plays out, you know? So that's
Yeah.
how I see it, because transcendental things do occur. And then at those points of realization, it seems paradoxical according to what might be playing out. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I know you kind of said it from the get-go, which was this kind of like, yeah, God perspective. And the last presentation I did presenting my contact events, I have to go here because I have to talk about God because, and there's something really weird going on about it. It's showing me that, listen, the beings never said this is God or that's God. They gave me something, they gave me these experiences, and then they were taking the memories out, but then those experiences would carry over in my everyday world. And so as a human reading spiritual books, I was feeling like I was connecting to a higher intelligence and my higher self, and then it would manifest itself by visioning. I could, make things happen in my world by visioning, and I feel the beings were very involved in that process. And so it was showing me even presently that whatever I think about their actions, they're on some other understanding level. Like they're on a level where they say, oh, humans take that and they interpret that as God. And so they're on that level. Never mind them kind of like doing things on a physical level. They're understanding something higher in the process. And what that also says to me too is that, so they knew my wife were coming and they knew all these other things. Then I'm so lost a little bit when I do hear that there's ideas of deception, and I'm actually not clear what's going on. I think so. For example, like the woman who with the ambassador, and I can actually relate to those things, and I sit there and think to myself, like, but how do we know that that woman didn't have a potential? And the beings are in this kind of lofty space about it all. Like they're like, oh, we see it from this global perspective, and I'm have to live out my day as a job, and that's my concern. And I felt them before kind of give me, hey, do that, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that because I have to live out my life and I have to do this. And so there is kind of a competing, but they're never forceful with me. And I'm sometimes recognizing that for me in this process, they have this larger understanding, but I run my life, and they kind of are very okay with me running my life, but they are always often kind of giving me, hey, think about that or do that, and then I make the choice, no, that doesn't make sense for me, so I won't do that. But other times exactly what they're saying that matches my intuition, matches what's right for me. And then we kind of have an agreement, and I say, yeah, I'll go down that path and I'll follow that and see where that goes. And yeah, I don't know. I hear people say this right from the get-go. When I started getting my memories out, people were saying, watch out, they're deceptive, they're deceptive. And so far, I haven't actually come across what I consider to be deception, except they don't reveal information when it's beyond my comprehension. And if they're in these higher realms, then they will definitely be dealing with things that are beyond our comprehension. And so they kind of like they walk on ice about when they say things. Oh, they just kind of brush over things and they don't explain it. And you're thinking they're keeping. For me, I thought they were keeping information. It turned out there was a lot more complexity than I could have ever comprehended. And so yeah, I sit in this space not clear about what is truly happening in deception. And though, by the way, you've also said so many great things. Listen, none of my stuff is channels. It's all real physical beings. And I do actually think something happens in the channeling process that kind of ungrounds people. So I do agree with that side of it, with what you're talking about. So yeah, it's just a very interesting conundrum. And I trust my heart. You also mentioned heart. I follow my heart. My heart's the guidance. I'm the one leading this life, not them. And so I let myself be the guide. And then yeah, they can offer ideas, and maybe I take it, maybe I don't. And but most of all, I do have a sense of trust of them. That's the difference. I do feel trust, and I haven't felt really deception yet. But I still, yeah, there's weird things, and I know other people have had different experiences. So yeah. What do you take
Yeah.
of that?
I mean, just connecting with your heart and, your higher self, as they say, and asking for clarity and truth and what's in your highest and best good. And as long as you're able to do that, I think confusion can come. I mean, this is where I learned a lot from, like narcissistic personality disorder and narcissistic abuse and cult abuse, where let's say the cult leader was actually playing like this godlike figure that might be channeling an entity or claiming to have spiritual power, and then they would exhibit the cult leader, cult abuse, narcissistic abuse kind of psychology. And so if you could recognize that for what it is, because over time it will create confusion and self-doubt, where they try to inculcate you to believe only their narrative until you become like them, and then you lose yourself. It's almost like you lose your identity and you lose your sense, your internal compass of, well, who you are, how you feel, what you really believe. So if you can, that's how I determine, well, are beings, they're good or evil. Like sometimes you can't tell when they're really good at being like a really good cult leader. A lot of times they have abilities to just be very charismatic, and then you only know after time the effects they have on you, like isolating you from your family. And pretty soon, you get more and more confused. You feel like you've lost your identity, and you start losing energy, and you have poor health, and everything's according to what they want to believe, instead of like, well, what do I really believe? So you need to like study that. Like if you wanted to know, that would be like a litmus test. Do they have like a narcissistic pattern of behavior?
Right.
Are they taking your energy? Are they deliberately gaslighting you? So that, let's say, well, I feel funny about this. Well, I'm feeling this in my body, or I'm kind of feeling angry, or I'm kind of feeling sad. And then they'll be saying, no, you're not. You're da, 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 da. And then they try to like override what you're feeling and what you're saying. Then they're like a con job, right? So you always have to trust, what am I feeling? What do I really believe? What do I really want? Well, who am I really? And do I really need them to identify with? So just finding out who you are in the purity of your essence of awareness, and then just observing over time. Sometimes you only know over time, you know, but yeah, in the dark side of Cupid, it gives like pretty clear examples. It's pretty like obvious. Like if they're like the bad guys, they're like, yeah, you can tell, you know what I mean? It's not. Yeah.
Interesting. Very cool, Evie. What I'm also loving in this field is specializations. And it's obviously that the abduction phenomenon is broad, and so I really, this, there's a deeper thing about what you're talking about here. How do aliens understand life patterns? How there's something more going on than especially when you're talking about like FBI and these people who are kind of maneuvered in. This isn't them just hoping and being like, oh look, they're going to talk to that person, we got to make sure, and they're like in there. They see some kind of, with me, they showed me a hologram of like a pattern of my life, where it was going to go. So they had this knowledge, they had this information, and how the hell do aliens have this? So there's just way more information that there's so much more where this can go. And you're touching on something that is really fascinating, that it was very part of my contact events, was they knew my life, they knew where it was going, they knew how it was going to project itself.
I know, that's kind of weird. Like even with the looking glass technology, even with the people who've had MyLabs, where it's like a human handler, where they would say, okay, well, this is going to happen, that going to happen, and then they would actually tell the person years in advance, like, well, that one's going to turn on you, this one's going to do this, and she would keep it to herself. And then sure enough, like, it played out the way it was, and they were able to identify what people would be like or what they would do like years in advance. So it was like they had future time travel technology. And then and then they would train us, so they would train people according to what they saw into the future, so that people would have abilities to be able to protect what was important when those things happen in the future, and then actually to train the people so that they could handle those situations and already be prepared to know intuitively. Like one of the things I talked about yesterday, I mean, I don't mean to go on, was some of the abductees or MyLabs were taught to do intuitive communication, so that when the future communications went down in these other scenarios, like in the future, social unrest and global weird shit, that they would be able to intuitively connect with people that they've already pre-bonded with, or they already have these kind of telepathic communication abilities, so that they will be more prepared than people who don't have that ability.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you.
So, Evie, how do I stay in touch with you? This is my first time ever on Meetup. Is there already the contact?
Well, I have an email I put on chat, and I have a website contact form on evelorgen.com.
And I'm pretty sure it's in her description in the Meetup. Also, I'm pretty sure I put all the
email address. Yeah, elorgen@gmail. And I usually don't go on Facebook so much because of the censorship issues and all the AI bots, and they create problems. So I haven't bothered with social media.
So it's just evelorgen.com. Very easy, right?
Or alienlovebite.com goes to the same place, but it's the same. Yeah. So I've been busy with a garden this year, so I haven't really done a lot of articles. I've been very busy with a garden and having fun with it, and growing squash that looks like little UFOs. Squash, I used to call them my UFO squash, and they're fun. They're a very versatile vegetable. So
me too.
That's my UFO. I can pull one out and show you, but sometimes they get like really big, and I have a thing where they're like the vampire cucumber and the vampire squash, and sometimes overnight they get like totally huge, and I'm like, oh my god. And then you have to pick them, or the plant won't grow other smaller squash as fast because the vampire one's taking all the energy. And they get huge. It's amazing.
I discovered the best, so I think is the best zucchini recipe is you slice the zucchini like as if you were slicing bread down, with little slivers, and then you cook it for a little bit, and in the meantime you've got some other cheese here like white cheddar or Parmesan or whatever, and then you put the white cheddar and the Parmesan on top, and you finish them off, and they are so delicious that you can eat a zucchini this size and you don't want to stop.
Yeah. It's great. I learned a lot of casseroles and learning how to do all these different things with squash because it's a good vegetable to have to
Yeah.
grow.
Well, I
You're
was
making me
trying to come up
hungry, you
with
ladies.
a good
You're making me
lunch
hungry.
food, right? How do
What
you
was
bring lunch how do you bring squash to lunch? So that's
oh
how that one came up.
oh squash fritters are good too. Like grating it, mixing with herbs and shallots and cheese and chickpea flour and throw it in a pan. You fry it up and then you have it with salsa or with a pesto. It's really, really good.
Mm,
Yeah, and it's
good.
protein. So I had to learn all these things. I figured, what am I going to do with this squash? You have to make it worth my while. I'm not going to throw it away, so I got to do something with it.
You're making me hungry. Can I ask a question? Evie here.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a powerful presentation, like you're a real asset to the community. It's great to meet you. I want to comment or ask you a question about, you talked about how relationship could be engineered. You mentioned the fellow in the FBI, he was abducted as a child and he gets maneuvered into the FBI. And I think that case of the woman being carried out of this high-rise building happened right in front of the Secretary General of the United Nations, if it was that case.
Yeah, I know.
I know there was a case like that, so it was planned, but my question
Amazing.
is, I learned from like Susie Hansen, she's got her book, The Dual Soul Connection, and she
Oh,
talks about how in the gray alien agenda, the plan to develop people and get them in positions of influence and power in the future to deal with, corruption within the government, within the world, to try to turn things. She predicts in the future things will get better, have much more virtuous, moral people, within positions of power, and that the gray aliens are gradually planning to do this. So this seems, I'm just wondering what you think about that. Like, it seems to be an optimistic vision for the future that she
well, yeah.
describes.
In the first book I wrote, I remember it was Mia Adams and the FBI agent named Jordan, and that was a code name. But I remember that whole case was really interesting because he was actually a hybrid. He was her son. He was her mitochondrial son from a alien harvesting thing where I think there was human military involved, and they knew she was a hybrid though. So they know that there's some people who are actually hybrids, but he was engineered to get involved with the FBI. And then I guess they actually tried to stop him from the relationship because they thought it was out of integrity that the aliens were doing this because he was actually her son. Well, but he was her mitochondrial son that came from her ovum. So it's an interesting case to show how they engineered things. And part of this was like this secret coded letter that Jordan wrote to her after he stopped contact because of all the spooky stuff within the FBI and what was really going on behind the scenes, right? Because he was being abducted and handled. Even the FBI don't even know the level of like your involvement when you're an abductee, maybe, on these other levels. Anyway, he was saying about how there was a future plan of the hybridization thing with the alien grays, but that was the reptilian ones that were more dangerous to our future, the future of humanity. And that one of the things that I've found is that, there's people in many of these different projects, and when they describe some of how they've been tortured, like the SSP people or the MK Ultra or the Montauk people, I mean, when you hear their stories and the bloodlines they're from, it's clear that there's an aspect of malevolence with the trauma-based mind control and some of the sexual abuse and some of the things that appear to be amoral, and they're being used as operatives to be assassins and all this other stuff. But then there's also people who are involved in these projects who have awakened on another level. And I think that they are sent by, a higher power in order to infiltrate, live through, and know the facts so that they could help turn things around from another level of, we can call it infiltration, but, so you can't ever really judge a person by their experience until they really connect with their higher purpose and their higher power. So you just don't know. But some people clearly seem to be operatives who are being manipulated and controlled. And the whole idea is like, well, how much do we want to self-explore and come to deep awareness and deep realization and essential goodness, and then see where that leads you and then make choices from the places of deeper knowing and realization and goodness. And really then don't worry about who's who and what form they take. How do they behave and what is their effect?
But your life is kind of amazing. Like, you're born into this family. Your father worked for Lockheed, a 32nd degree Mason, a
33rd.
Shriner, 33rd. Yeah. So do you think within Lockheed and the Masons that they are working with like good and bad aliens, and they're part of this milieu, and you're thrust into this from birth? So what's your role? Like, was your dad on the good side or the bad side? And all right, what's your relationship with your dad's lineage or your bloodline?
Yeah, that's interesting because I know it's on my mom's side of the family, but then there's connections. Anyway, there's connections on both sides anyway. So I think they were following probably more on my mom's side, but maybe also my dad's side that I wasn't aware of. But one of the things that I remember, well, I won't say who my parents are, but one of the things, he was being considered for a particular job that was like a higher clearance on another level, where they would interview him at Lockheed. And I can't remember what the project was, but I think it was a higher level project where they had to assess, like do a personality test to find out if these people would be able to handle like these kinds of high clearance, weird shit jobs. And I think they turned him down, and he was really upset, like felt like bad that he couldn't, qualify for this high level clearance. And one of the things that they had asked him is that it had to do with like his beliefs in the Bible and biblical stuff. But he was raised like a Southern Baptist, but at the same time, he was like a total narcissist, right? So he was like a messed up Southern Baptist. So one of the reasons why they passed him up was because of his beliefs that seemed to be rigid based on this Southern Baptist biblical belief system, which I think they thought, well, maybe, this idea of right and wrong might come into play with whether or not he can handle the job. Because I think, people are being faced with all kinds of things in some of these high level clearance jobs where their morality and what they believe in right and wrong, what they believe about God is called into question. Like even in one of my abduction experiences, I just think it's weird when I think about it, but it was when I was going to go see Barbara Bartholick and get a regression to find about the truth behind especially the love bite. I wanted to find out how they abducted me and when they put me together, what was really going on, because I knew there was something not right, And then when I was abducted in this like lucid reality where there was a military man behind a desk dressed in like these fatigues, and then he was like interrogating me, asking me all these questions. And one of the questions is like, what do you believe about God? And I'm like, well, why would a military man give a shit about what you believe about God? And so I said, well, I'm here to do the will of God, and that's that, and I was like, kind of like a strong Christian at the time. I'm like, well, I believe in God, and I'm here to do the will of God. And he got really, really pissed off. And then he made me eat something. And I was just going on and on, like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to find out the truth of my experiences, and I'm going to do the will of God, And then they made me eat something, which was like this weird piece of paper that had like a drug on it or something. And then they made me eat 2 of them because I was being argumentative, and he didn't like my answer about doing the will of God, right? Because he couldn't control me or whatever. And then in that experience, it was as if then I got like really tranced out from eating this drug thing. And then they were beaming in these telepathic messages at the same time. They're going, don't worry about it. Just go along with it. Don't ask any questions. Everything's going to be okay. Don't go see Barbara Bartholick or we're going to kill your family. And da, 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 da. And they were like, go along with it. So it was like, what the hell? So I got lucid in a lot of these experiences where I caught them. They have technologies that are beyond your wildest dreams. They could pull you up astrally, then they could astrally interrogate you and mind control you in the astral form. But if you get lucid, then you can like bypass some of what they're doing. And so I pissed them off, even though I did get sick. But I was lucid enough to know that, what, they're just trying to do this mind job. But then after I lived out the experience and had kind of like my dark night of the soul, near-death experience thing where I realized my connection with God and my co-creation and all of this, it did work out for a greater good in terms of my self maturity, and that I ended up writing a book. I ended up learning more about myself and the phenomena and helping people. So it played out in such a way that I was able to do the book, but I was pissed off about being stopped from being able to travel and do a deeper hypnotic regression. It's like they wouldn't allow me to do that, but I knew they were playing games, and actually there was an involvement with the person on a military secret level in which he was being instructed to do things. I shouldn't say this, but I'm not going to tell you who or what, but that person was acting as a kind of handler, but he was also being controlled by not only aliens, but another faction of humans. And then one of the things that I thought was interesting, I don't know why I'm blurting it out, but what the fuck, right? One of the things that he said is when he did, let's say they did research with a lot of abductees, and they knew there was maybe a problem with certain alien species, like messing up with people and manipulating them and mind controlling them, and that there was a certain signature of which they were concerned about, like the military. Okay. And then he would tell me privately, he said, well, I know that you've had these experiences, but you're not like them. And this was an interesting thing. I'm like, I don't know what you mean, right? But then when I got to know Barbara Bartholick and we had a lot of deep conversations along with Dr. Carla Turner's work, there was like a clan of types of abductees that we had a different kind of experience and a different kind of connection in unique ways that wasn't necessarily the same as, let's say, the garden variety alien gray experience. And I always wondered about that because I didn't even know what that meant. But I later discovered that the people who were part of the clan that Barbie knew about, because Barbie knew how to recognize all of this. She knew before we knew. We were part of this clan thing that was of a different signature than the garden variety of what the garden variety was, or the main narrative belief system. Let's just put it that way. And that, one of our people who did try to expose these things, she was tortured and killed and murdered. And so, it just led me to question a lot of things that, it's not all set in stone. There are different groups, and that there are military and high level people who already know who you are and what these groups are and how they're affecting people. And they know before you know, and they'll abduct you after you have an abduction with an alien, and then they'll interrogate you and try to find out information, that, right? So it's just very interesting.
Wow. I guess I want to follow up with that. I think the biblical idea or God is kind of threatened by the reality of the grays and the mantis actual nature of reality. Maybe that's one thing. But what do you think of, say, the thesis that the gray aliens and the mantis have a positive agenda for humanity, and that over periods of hundreds of years, they're going to transform our genetics so we're more telepathic, we have quantum dimensional consciousness, in the future there'll be a hybrid of Homo sapiens sapiens with grays, and this is the future of humanity 500 years from now, and that's the plan. There's nothing we can do about it. They made the decision. That's what they're going to do, and they're bringing us into a federation of planet. They've already made this decision. Do you think that's the reality of the situation?
Well, I think that they can genetically augment and modify us for sure. But I think our soul spiritual essence has the higher hand of authority and power over even our genetic expression. So that's kind of like the Bruce Lipton main theory, and it's something that I came to realize later, that they may try to implement alien hybrid genetics that may or may not be good depending on where you fit into their program. Like they could do epigenetic things, like in the Helga Morrow case, and she knew von Neumann, her family knew von Neumann, who came from Germany, and the paperclip and all that. But she knew that when she was in the womb of her mom, they epigenetically did certain things so that they would amplify her psychic abilities, and it did work. And then she was a really good psychic. So they've been doing this since for years, where they can tweak this here and there, and then you grow up and you have more abilities, and then they keep, you know, streamlining it down the line until they have this quality pretty much more perfected over the generations. But I think our own spiritual will of the Most High, which is beyond the temporal beings, can change or cause the augmentation not to express. So this is what I learned from someone I interviewed for 10 plus years now, who had Draco, probably Draco genetics, or had a Draco connection and RH negative, and, you know, abilities through the roof, but also other things that were health problems as a result of abductions. But basically, if you do not accept the full alien program of consciousness in us, let's say a type of parasitization of their consciousness living in us, then that expression of genetics doesn't have to be switched on. It stays in remission or unexpressed. But if you, even if somebody gets, let's say, hosted or possessed by an entity, and it could be a reptilian or a drac or this or that, then if you have those hybrid genetics already in you, then they may express more freely, and then you might even be able to shapeshift or express more fully those things, but only if you have the consciousness frequency already in you. So you can always override that by being the purest of the highest eternal nature that you are, and then just basically blow out those genetics and just change the whole program, like Neo in the Matrix.
Yeah,
right.
But isn't the issue there like good ones and bad ones? If these bad reptilians are part of your genes, yeah, you want to avoid that. But if the Greys have a wholesome agenda for the future of humanity and the planet, wouldn't it be good just to go along with that? Just
I don't trust. I
go
personally don't trust them. You know, I'm gonna do a direct connect with the Holy Spirit, and then we'll make our choices. And be like, no, I ain't going to the middleman or this man. I'm gonna like direct connect, and then we'll talk. Okay, so that I don't have the chance of being deceived into an agenda that, you know, looks good, sounds good, but it's like, uh-oh. You know, I just personally don't trust him based on who I am and what I learned. But it doesn't mean that every single being of a certain race is like a bad guy, you know. And I've heard that we tend to make black and white decisions when we really don't know as much. And the more we learn, the more kind of complex things become. So you can't make black and white statements, really. So it's more like, how do we recognize an energetic signature of being connected to the Holy Spirit of truth and goodness and compassion, and exhibit those frequencies and that fruit on the tree, and then all is answered.
Yeah. Well, your life story is really something because of your dad and your mom. I don't know about your mom's bloodline. What was your dad's job at Lockheed?
Well, as far as I know, he was an aerospace engineer, but I remember one of the jobs he had, since he's dead now, it doesn't matter. He worked at one of these places that was next to Lawrence Livermore Labs, and it was like a tracking station. It was probably late 70s, early 80s. This is a long time ago. And then it was just a small building that was close on the same property as Lawrence Livermore Labs, in Livermore, I guess, California. And then they had all kinds of equipment at that time, which was basically surveillance and how to identify craft or things coming in and out of the ocean or the skies or the earth, and identify them. Are they ours? Is it a jet? Is it a plane, a UFO, or TR-3B or whatever? And it, you know, what is it? Is it ours, or is it's not ours? And one of the reasons I discovered, and he said, well, don't tell anybody, but I had a UFO sighting when I was in San Francisco, living in the dorms, San Francisco State University. And this same UFO, I think it was multicolored lights, and it was seen over the whole Bay Area. And there was a pilot who also reported it like in the South Bay. And so he actually said, okay, I'll look it up, right? You know, and go back through the data, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, so that UFO you saw, well, that was an unmanned craft, but it was not ours. So in other words, it wasn't human. It was other, but it was unmanned. So he said, but don't tell anybody, you know. So yeah.
I should turn it back to Mimi. Thanks. Yeah, I could ask more questions, but I don't want to hog you too much. I'll step back a bit. Thank you. Wow.
You.
Wow. You're just an asset to the whole community. Wow. It just your experience goes so back so many decades.
Yeah, I'm unpopular, I think. I mean, among the some
That's a
crowd.
good sign. That's a good sign. I think mainstream ufology community is largely controlled. You know, it's
Well, you know, there's a lot of disruptors, and you know, that's something that James Bartley and I had, you know, discovered along the way. All these things, like at first it used to be the UFO community, then it was UFO paranormal truther, crop circles, governance computer, and then, you know, pretty soon it just encompassed all these people. But at the time, there were all these people like coming out as whistleblowers who were in these like MK Ultra, you know, bloodline families, but then they were sent in as disruptors. And so we figured out like who the disruptors were. And then he was able to identify like people who were deliberate spooks who would be introduced in the UFO community with these books. And they were always funded. So they always like had money for publishers for these books. And they would go to conferences back when they could, you know, books about dolphins connected with ETs and new agey stuff, which sounds good, but they were actually plants from these like spook agencies to try to spin and infiltrate the UFO community so that it would be under a lot of confusion, so that people would, you know, navigate towards what they wanted to implant that had a good feel to it. But behind the scenes, there was all these other things going on that, you know, we would tended to get punished for it. You know, just like you do on Facebook. If you say too much, then the stupid web bot AI bots come out and you know, create arguments and stupid shit. So they try to basically put public opinion towards what is not even the statistics and faking it on friggin' social media. You know what I mean? They've been doing the same thing in the UFO community for years. So what else is new, right?
Information would come in to make us look ridiculous, right? Some
Yes.
of the weirdest, wildest things that people would
Yeah.
write books about or come up with theories about. I won't even say which ones. I think we all know which ones. And then it was really easy to ridicule the whole community.
Yeah, and that's why
Oh, they're conspiracy theories. They
we still don't talk about it. Like, oh, they think we're a nut, you know, just like even now, like people think, ooh, where are you from? You're not like normal. And then to me, it's like, what's wrong with that? You know, and I forget that you can't always talk about like the weird psychic shit and the interdimensional surveillance technology and, you know, oh, they did this, did that, you know, and I forget, oops, I can't talk about it even now, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, can I just say something just before you go? Evie, can you hear me okay?
yes.
Hi, Evie. My name's Ian Halling. I'm from the UK. I work with Linda Moulton Howe and help her with her Earth Files show. I've worked with Linda Moulton Howe for several years now. But I just wanted to say that I've got your book.
Oh my gosh.
I do have the other one as well.
Oh, wow.
It did help me a lot with understanding my relationship, a love bite relationship with an abductee I was married to for 5 years, and it was very useful. There's plenty that I could talk about with you about that. And it's a shame our colleague David isn't here tonight. Don't you agree, Brian? Because David also, in that evening when we opened ourselves up, both of us, about the absolute intense relationship that we had with these people who had ET contacts, and you know, I was drawn into them myself to a certain degree. I've also got this one that I can thoroughly recommend, Carla Turner.
You know, that one, I lost mine. You know what happens when you lend them out and never get them back? I don't even know if
that was difficult to get hold of. And I've also got Beyond the Fringe. So you know
yeah.
Yeah,
you know, she was going to do, I mean, I was just on a show with James. I don't mean to interrupt, but actually Barbara Bartholic and Carla Turner were actually going to do a whole series of books based on Ted Rice's Masquerade of Angels. And they were going to do a whole series because there was much more that they had discovered, but you know, all her files basically went into oblivion after she died, after Barbie died. So it's too
Is
bad,
this
you
Carla
know?
Turner?
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
well, she died, but Barbie had a lot of tapes and like she had a lot of material, but after she died, which was kind of an engineered thing over time, you know, they just do that. And then she lost a lot of her information. And all I ended up was like 3 case histories that I put in the dark side of Cupid. But we learned so much from all her conversations. And I wish that someone like her work could just be out in the open so that, you know, we could just put everything on the table, you know, the good, bad, ugly, and everything in between, because it is more complex than I think what we had thought in the early days. Like we had thought something, but then after 20 years after observing somebody's life, we came to understand so much more, you know.
Well, I just had an idea, Evie. I always get these ideas, crazy ideas, and sometimes we do them. I had the idea that we could do a Evie Lorgen part 2 and maybe have people share like
Yeah, you
a
know.
story, and I have a story also, a
Okay.
couple of stories.
Yeah,
People who want to share with you
yeah,
and and
that's
give
a good
you our
idea. Well, what I could do is like sometimes like I have so many cases and things I actually forget, like, oh yeah, I forgot about that case. And then like James Bartley has to remind me of things. Like I guess I'm getting old, but sometimes there's just 1 or 2 cases that I have that's even on my website that would be a point of discussion about a certain aspect. The Malanga questionnaire has some interesting things on it, which is kind of involved, and it's different from the one that Mary Rodwell has in her organization. But Malanga had some interesting questions that related to maybe some genetic things that was interesting, or types of
you want
beings.
to send that to
Um,
me,
I
even
thought I sent it to you. I'll just send you the form, and it's a
Yeah,
doc
okay,
file. You don't have to fill it out, but you can just look at the items, and sometimes they trigger memories like, oh, well, shit, I didn't think that was related. And then it
right.
trigger
Okay.
like awarenesses of things, and you just kind of look at it and see how Malanga's mind worked in terms of like his whole theory was really phenomenal in helping me understand it more clearly. But we're going on to upper levels of like there's a woman I've been interviewing over 11 years now, who her name is Marit, a Scandinavian MyLab, and what she had come to discover with respect to artificial intelligence and how it's connected with some of the aliens and is program working through us, so that our natural awareness should override that program. And that's actually part of the correction that I think is part of this Gnostic idea of the correction of the whole demiurge problem, and how that actually even falls into some of this alien stuff. But it's complex, you know, so maybe that's just like going overboard with where we're going with explorations in consciousness and awareness, and how deeply and subtly these kinds of programming of archetypes, even in the collective unconscious, affect us. So I don't know, maybe that's too much, but it's a good point to look at, because the levels of influence are greater than we had thought. Let's just put it that way.
Well, I agree with you with the correction, because I think that human beings can do it on our own. I think that we have a direct link to God, and that
Oh,
we,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
that we
But I
can
think
do it
there has
on.
been genetic corruptions, which is part of the original biblical narrative, which we are actually part of that correction, that we will correct that direct connect so that we can become free and become our fullest expression of what we're meant to be, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that doesn't negate the people that are doing it a different way. And I'm completely open to the people that are doing it a different way. But for myself, that's what I've decided. I've decided that the sovereignty thing, and the vertical connection with God with no middleman is probably the way to go for me.
Yeah, me
I've
too.
got the rebel gene.
Me too. I'm naturally rebellious, I have to say it, but maybe it's just my personality. Like I'm going to question everything, and I'm going to be a little rebel, just like Carla Turner was. It's like, I am, you know, and yeah.
Yeah, one more burning question.
Okay.
You mentioned the 20 and back program, Evie. I read about this. I thought, well, I don't know. I haven't studied enough. I thought, no, this can't be true. Like you live 20 years and then they age regress your body and then they send you back in time and you've only gone 50 minutes. Then you go on to Gaia TV. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
I don't know. I don't believe it, but what do you, I want to ask your view. Do you think it's actually true?
Well, I mean, I had discussions with Randy and Andy Basaggio long before they went public, you know, and helped them in ways that they needed at the time, just with private discussions. But even in the early days, we knew that they were taking us, they could take us in and out of time, or take us and then seem to grow us up in the future to take ovum harvesting and take us back. And there's expanded time experiences. So we know that they could mess with time and somehow affect us, but I don't really know. I'm starting to question, like, is this whole flat earth theory have some relevance? And this is based on an experience I had, and are what they talking about true? There's certainly many who've had this experience and could mutually be witness testimony of remembering specific scenarios that's beyond chance, and how they're doing this, I don't know, but they are doing something. And it could be like a very long period of time in this other reality. And I think there is something to do with parallel worlds too, and parallel selves, just like on the, that Man in the High Castle series. That's not triggering. I don't know what is, but there's something to that. The whole parallel world thing and parallel like selves. So who knows? Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's still a mystery.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
there's a little bit of everything going on,
Yeah. Yeah.
There's room for everything.
Okay. Well, then I'll send you, how about I'll send you the Malanga self-assessment questionnaire thing,
That would
and
be
you could
great.
send it to your group, and then you just take a look at it and see what you think. And then, I could always send you the original article of his theory.
Do you have it in English? Do you have that in
Yeah,
English?
I have the one that I did in English, and there may be some that are on Scribd or whatever. And it has to do with his theory called the global picture of alien interference. And he shows the life cycle of what they do based on how he perceives certain specific aliens that he has described, that I have in my interview. I'll just give you the basic interview
Yeah,
and the
sure.
basic
Yeah.
and then you could look at it and say, I don't know, if you want to talk about, fine. If you don't, we can talk about something else,
Right. And actually some people might want to do a rebuttal because they've had a totally different experience. Right. So that would be interesting too. I mean, that's one person's point of view, but then we have other people that are really having experiences that I don't understand. Right.
Yeah.
But they're definitely having them. So
Yeah, there are different ones. And I would say that I think there are positive beings who are here, not only interdimensionally, but in the body, but they tend to keep a low profile for a reason. So a lot of times it's not safe yet. And it's just like what Chris Thomas talked about in his interview with Miles Johnson. It's like, there have been people in history when you vibe too high at a certain frequency, you get caught in their traps and they try to sabotage you at this particular junction in our reality history. So that a lot of the good ones, you actually want to keep a low profile about it. And they tend to already know, and they already know who you are if you're having them. And then they start sniffing you out and sending people in your lives to try to infiltrate. So
yes.
sometimes that's just why I don't even talk about things, everything.
Yeah. No, absolutely. There's a lot of people taking that route like you, and they only talk in code, and they only, send secret letters, and I mean that's what the world is coming to right now. But I think,
even more
that we need to break through that.
Right.
At least some, right?
Yeah.
In order to keep our rights and and responsibilities.
Yeah.
To disclosure,
Yeah. What do you want to disclose? And now, like, Well, it depends where we are in the world. Yeah, because we were warned about this anyway, by the way. I mean, even in the Love Bite book, the Angelina Scott and whatever case, this was 20 something years ago, where they were like, okay, social unrest, all these things are going to happen, earth changes, we're preparing you for this. This is what's going to happen. But it was looking glass based on whatever the timeline was. This is the projection. This is the projection. And they were training her, and like, things are happening now.
Right.
So,
And you know, one thing that I was saying to a friend the other day is that a lot of things that I used to think were really, really bad things that happened to me. Bad. Oh, this terrible thing happened to me. Car accidents, whatever. They always had a silver lining, and the silver lining was either time where I could stop and think about stuff, and it pulled me away from a mundane existence to where I was able to do spiritual work or thinking work or healing work, emotional healing work, right?
yeah.
And I think that that's what the challenges always are. You know, they always have a silver lining, even when things are challenging like they are right now. I think that they are making us stronger. You
Yes.
know, they're hardening us for the things that really are coming,
Yeah.
you know, in the future. And I think some of us will have to be super duper strong
Yeah. Well, so
to
they
help
call them.
other people.
Yeah. All right. We'll see how it plays out.
Yep.
Yeah. On the other side. Yeah.
Well, you'll be ready with your pickles. So I'll be
Yes,
coming to
I have
your
lots
house
of
to get
pickles and
pickles.
lots of UFO squash. So if they get mad, I'll just like throw a squash at them and bop them in the head. Yeah. Hey.
Okay,
thank
people, I love you, and I love you, Evie. Thank you so much. And thank you for
you.
that session that we did together. That was really amazing. It helped me. You have no idea.
That's wonderful.
So much.
We just want to say goodbye to Evie because she's just going. I
Okay.
just wanted to say thank you, Evie, so much.
Thank you.
And perhaps we'll discuss my case in a little bit more detail. I'm always telling people, though, referencing your books, because I talk to a lot of abductees, and when we start going into their history and their story, it very often does tie in with your findings and my findings as well, based upon a lot of this working on permissions sought and agreements made as well. So thank you very much for everything.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you for
Thank
that,
you, Evie.
Ian. I was hoping that you would pipe up sooner, but Ian does a lot of work with abductees himself.
Great.
Yeah, with Linda and with me.
Good.
Well,
Okay.
Evie, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Evie.
It
Stay
was so
safe.
lovely to have you here.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.